Welcome back to all students. We'll just give people a few moments to come and also make sure that the stream is running properly, since that's given a little bit of a problem a couple times now.
Hi, Doniola.
Hi, Tejala. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. I hear you well and see you well.
Okay, same with you. Yes, looks like your setup there is perfect. That's just the stream does not. Oh, there it goes. It kicked in. All right. So, and that's right on time. All right. So I think what we can do is start this session. So Tejal and I will be presenting the topic of pervasion itself. So you should have the documents that were sent in the WhatsApp group and also available on the website for day 2.2. So day, the day is the day, and then the point 1 or 2 means either lecture 1 or 2. So we're in lecture 2, so that's day 2.2. So there's 3 drills and then a PDF with slides, a presentation on understanding pervasion. So I can do the screen share to make sure you all see what that looks like. It looks like this. Now the first slide has a question on top that says, is there a difference between the following 2 questions? I'm sorry that there are no page numbers, but that's okay. Okay. So the first thing though, before we get right into that, I was thinking since last session we ended, it seemed like there might have been still a couple questions. So just to give an opportunity for 1 or 2 questions now that may be left over from the last session. So if there's anyone with a burning question that didn't get answered yet, now is a chance. So you can raise your hand or just come straight to the stage if you are on a mobile device, because we realize now that you are not able to raise your hand. Okay, so looks like there are no hands. Good. Oh, someone is. No. Okay, good. Well, then we'll just move right on with the lecture, the explanation. Okay, so we're going to be looking through this, these notes as our rough outline for the lecture today. But like yesterday, we're not gonna just, we'll kind of go through it, Tejal and I together, so you can reference it as we go along. But you shouldn't really need to like be reading it per se. Okay. So then, well, the first slide is something that I want you all to see. So I'll do the screen share of it. Okay. So and I'll ask Tejal what she thinks as we go along because she is up here on stage. All right. So Tejal, I'll ask the question to you, but also everyone else who's listening, please think for yourselves what you think the answer is. Is there a difference between the following 2 questions? Again, question statements, really. They're not phrased as questions, but they're in essence questions. Take the subject. Something reasonably described as a hue. It follows it's the definition of color.
I accept.
You accept? Okay. And again, now when we say is there a difference between the 2, you can think, well, would you accept both of them, or would you accept one and say why to the other, or say why to both? So, okay, Tejal's accepted 1. Now, number 2, it follows that if something is something reasonably described as a hue, then it's necessarily the definition of color?
I accept.
And Tejal accepts. Okay, so in a sense, then you could say that maybe they're basically the same question. Is that reasonable? I mean, you accepted both of them at least.
That's what I am thinking right now when I'm looking at these 2 statements, Doniola.
Okay, good.
I'm not able to see a difference, but yeah, I'm wondering what you think.
They're pretty similar in structure, right? They're quite similar in structure. They have the same two items. Something reasonably described as a hue is the first item. Definition of color is the second item. Um, the wording's a little bit different at the beginning. Say take the subject on the one hand, in the first one, you say it follows on the second one. So it's, there's a little difference in wording, and so that's obvious, right? But does it mean something different? That's really what we're asking, right? So maybe we could just get a show of hands, actually. Why not just see what everyone else thinks directly, since you can do that. If you think that they do have the same meaning, or at least that they both should be accepted as true, raise your hand. Okay, cool. So there's a handful of hands. Very nice. Okay. Okay, good. So let's now kind of explore a little bit more and see if, in fact, that is the case. Okay. So now we can go on to the next one. So again, I'm not going to screen share the whole time. You guys can kind of, look at your own whatever you have there, if it's printed or on your device. So there's two different kinds of ways you would try and think about it to see if you need to respond with I accept or Y in these two cases, right? So for the thesis statement, so again, what were those two? The first was a thesis statement, and the second was a statement of pervasion. That's what that's called, right? A statement of pervasion. So for the thesis statement, we had take the subject, something reasonably described as a hue. It follows as a definition of color. And so when you want to answer that question, you basically just ask yourself, is the subject the predicate? Right? So just like what Joe was going over with the last session, when you're looking at the three-part syllogism, the whole subject, predicate, and reason, and you want to know, should I say the reason's not true? Then you ask, is the subject the reason? So here with the thesis statement, there's just two components, a subject and a predicate. So you just ask, is the subject the predicate? So is something reasonably described as a hue the definition of color? So Tejal, what do you think? Is something reasonably described as a hue the definition of color?
I accept, Venerable.
It
I
is.
accept that something, yeah.
Well, it is, at least in this context, right? I mean, yeah, we could go on and debate for hours about if that's really the definition of color, the most ultimate, wonderful, perfect definition for color or not. So, right. And so, I mean, of course, she just accepted it already when I asked her the first time in the, formal wording of the thesis statement, she accepted it. But if we think about it, kind of in colloquial terms, maybe there'd be a difference, but she still accepts it's true. Okay. So
Well,
that's a
I'm
thesis.
also accepting, just to, for the sake of our participants, to to tell them that in the understanding matter and physical universe, we have a definition of color which says whatever is reasonably described as hue. So on that basis, I'm accepting this statement.
That's right. On the basis of what we're using as our shared common ground for the definitions of these objects. And, I would suggest, keep that document handy, right? So again, which one is it? It's this understanding. Well, there's two versions, right? There's a simplified and then a little bit more elaborate with some explanation, but here is the simplified version. So understanding matter in the physical universe, right? So just if you just keep that kind of open, or if it's printed available, the whole course, that could be very helpful. Okay, so right, so we went down, if we go down to color, something reasonably described as a hue, there we have it.
That's right.
Now, let's go back to our second question, which was the statement of pervasion, and then we'll think about it. See, colloquially, what's the kind of most the easiest way to think about it in terms of how you would answer, how to come to your answer. So the statement again, the pervasion statement, it follows that if something is something reasonably described as a hue, then it's necessarily the definition of color. Clap. Now the word something appears there twice, so notice that, right? If it follows that if something, now that's an important thing to keep in mind. That first something. The second something is just part of the definition of color, right? So how do you determine it? And maybe Tejal, I'll ask you to think about it along with the students.
Yes.
Does there exist a something, an anything, something that you could imagine in the universe, which is the first item here, but not the second item? Does there exist something which is something reasonably described as a hue, but is not the definition of color?
Oh, Venerable, I'm having so much difficulty with this statement. I mean, it's really confusing me, but I don't think that there is
You
something.
don't think,
And if I may
okay.
call that, yeah, so if I may say that it follows that if X, which is the first something, X is something reasonably described as a hue, then it's necessarily the definition of color. So I am not able to come up with something which is,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh,
So
okay,
can
so
you?
let's see. Is it the case? Well, let's try and think of something that might be. Let's go through,
Can you
right?
think of something? Yeah, let's see.
Right. So what we would do, you go through your mind. You cycle through, right? Cycle through what you
Mhm.
know about things reasonably described as hues, right? How many somethings reasonably described as a hues are you familiar with? Do you know? Well, we
Yeah,
know color is one of them, right? Color is
yes.
reasonably described as hue. We know that there's different divisions within color, so those must all also be reasonably
Right.
described as hue. So we have primary
That's
color,
right.
we have secondary color,
Mhm.
right? Within primary colors, we have, well, two ways of getting our primary colors from subtractive and additive color mixing. So we have RGB, red, green, blue. We have
Mhm.
blue, ngosek amarshi,
Yeah,
blue, yellow, white, and red. That's so like the color blue, right? Or the color red. That's reasonably
right.
described as a hue, isn't it?
Well, it's reasonably described as a blue hue or reasonably described as a red hue.
Right, which means it's reasonably described as a hue. Exactly. So it's something,
Yes, that's right.
right. So because it's just like it's a color, it's a, the color red, it's a red color. It's also a color. It's also a primary color, right? So
That's
the
right.
color red, it's reasonably described as a red hue, reasonably described as a hue, reasonably described as a primary hue. All those things are true of the color red.
Okay.
So then if we look at it and we go back to the original question, well,
Oh,
there does exist something which is something reasonably described as a hue, but is not the definition of color, right? Because take the
that's
subject,
right.
the color red, just the color red,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So it actually is reasonably described as a hue, but the color red is not the definition of color, is it?
Oh, that's fantastic. That's completely right, Donyola. So we
Right,
have something which is, let's say, red. It is something which is reasonably described as a hue, but it is not the definition of color.
right.
Okay.
And why is it not the definition of color?
Why is it not the definition of color? Because the definition of color is simply something which is reasonably described as a hue.
So there's no other thing in the whole world you could say other than something reasonably described as a hue that could be the definition of color. In the context where we're accepting that as the definition of color. Obviously, that's a different question of if that's the best
Uh,
or ultimate definition of color.
that's right. And
Right,
red does
right.
not fit the definition of color.
Well, it does not. It is not the definition of color.
Exactly.
It
It's not
fits
the
it.
definition.
I mean, it fits it in the sense that red itself has the quality of being something reasonably described as a hue, but it is not does not have the quality of being the definition of color. So that's the trick here. There's a difference between those two qualities, right? Something can
Mhm,
be reasonably described as a hue, which itself is the definition of color, but
mhm,
not itself be, the X here, the something is
mhm.
reasonably described as a hue. The reasonably described as a hue then is the definition of color, but this X here is not the definition of color, right? There's a difference in those two qualities, being reasonably described as a hue versus being the definition of color. Yeah, good.
Fantastic.
So what does this mean? Another way you can think about this. So maybe I'll just flash this up on the screen share again, just to make sure everyone can see it. So when we put it up here, what we can see is that this slide says there's another way to think about this. What's the way you can think about it is for every one pervasion statement, you get two thesis statements. one pervasion statement yields two thesis statements. And those two thesis statements can be different. So when we had this question statement, it follows that if something is something reasonably described as a hue, then it's necessarily the definition of color, clap, and then whether you accept or not, it still turns out that you have to then pry it apart, right? You have to tease out the two different thesis statements that come out of it, and what are those individually? And now I'll ask you, Teja, individually. Take the subject, the color red. So I thought of that subject. It follows that it's something reasonably described as a hue.
I accept.
You accept, and then take the subject, the color red. It follows that it's the definition of color.
Why?
Why? So that's the two thesis statements. One is true and one is not. So here is a way of breaking it down graphically, so you can just kind of use that for your notes. Don't need to go, that's just kind of a more visual representation, but explaining it. Let's explain it now. So this is, just leave the slide up on the screen share for a minute. So if you break it down, then the three components of the statement of pervasion, the first one just being the word something, the second one being the something reasonably described as a hue, the third one being the definition of color. The A, something, that's a variable that you have to supply as the debater. Whether the challenger or the defender supplies it, someone has to think of a subject. It's not explicitly stated when you make a statement of pervasion. The only things that are explicitly stated in the statement of pervasion are predicates. Got it? I mean, they can become reasons too, but they're not the subject. They're things about a separate item that you have to come up with from your imagination, from your mind, from your memory. Okay, so that's the tricky thing here. Okay, I'll stop screen sharing. Okay, so far, Tejal, is that clear for you?
Doniola, it's clear for me, and may I just recap very briefly?
Please.
So the first statement simply said, take something which is reasonably described as a hue. It follows it is the definition of color. Here we were saying take. So we were taking that very particular thing per se. And when we do that and we say, is this the definition of color? Yes, we accept. But in the second, so the first one is the thesis statement, and the second one is the pervasion statement, where you are now not saying this something which is reasonably described as a hue, but now you're saying if it is something, if it is X, which is reasonably described as a hue, then it follows it is the definition of color. And to this we say, well, I don't accept, or reason not established, or no pervasion at the end. So we're making a difference between take or if. Yes. And that's the difference between the thesis statement and the pervasion. Do I understand it right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And so again, when you phrased it, you said it follows that if it or X, right? It's just a variable. You can say, we're using just the word something, but other, schools or, programs that teach and practice debate, sometimes they just say it. It follows that if it is something reasonably described as a hue. So it actually in English, it has that kind of ability to be this very general kind of open variable, right? Or you could even just use x, right? Just like in mathematics, we use the variable x, y, z, and so forth. So you could just put x in there. It follows that if x is something reasonably described as a hue. So where does that come from? Again, Teja, just a reminder. So then if you put x or it or something, then where does when do you fill that in and take out the variable and put in something concrete?
Well, when we have to come up with the pervasion statement, I have to, so from our own, memory or understanding.
When you make it into a thesis statement, you're right. You right. Take the pervasion statement, and then you try to pin it down to an actual particular subject. That's when you get the thesis statement. So then you say, okay, well, let's examine. If you accept that the pervasion is true, then you have to go, okay, well, is it true of this subject or that subject? Is it true of the color red? Is it true of primary color? Is it true of the color blue? You just go through all the different things you could possibly imagine that could be something reasonably described as a hue, and then check if individually each of them are also the definition of color. Now, of course, you don't literally go through every single thing in the universe like that, but you think of, some, you consider, okay, well, what might be, something that could disprove the pervasion, and it might
Exactly.
take a
So
few tries.
even if we find one illustration that disproves the pervasion, then we know that the pervasion doesn't hold.
Exactly. You only need one. You only need one. Yep.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. So that's the next couple slides. Just make this point again that we just discussed, which is simply that when a statement of pervasion is true, then both of the thesis statements that come out of it have to be true. So, Tejal, we used as in our pervasion statement, we use two items, something reasonably described as a hue, and for the first, and for the second definition of color. How would you try to make it different so that let's leave the first one as something reasonably described as a hue, but change the second one so that it becomes a true statement. So the pervasion statement becomes true.
Okay, I can try to attempt that. So then I can say it follows that if something is something reasonably described as a hue, then it's necessarily form.
Form, and then is necessarily form. So we have a new statement of pervasion where the first half of it, or the first majority of it is the same as before, but we just changed the last item from the definition of color to form. So now, how does this make it different? So now we can say, so I'll ask it, in the formal way. It follows that if something is reasonably described as a hue, then it's necessarily a form.
I accept.
You accept. So now I'm going to try to get her. I'm going to try to think of a subject that is the first thing, but not the second thing. See if I can do it. Take the subject the color red. It follows that it is something reasonably described as a hue.
I accept.
Take the subject the color red. It follows that it is a form.
I accept.
You accept. Oh, darn. So they're both true. So this time you actually were right. The statement of pervasion was true. And I didn't get you. And to be frank, I can't think of anything that is something reasonably described as a hue, but not a form, right?
Uh-huh.
Now you may try, you could try, right? It's not to say that you can't be creative and try and think of something that would fit that, that would cancel that pervasion or disprove that pervasion. Okay, now what do we really do with this in terms of in terms of actually doing the practice of debate, and as Joe explained and made clear, like, really as a challenger to get a defender to reverse a previous position, to get them to contradict themselves. So what we would do is we would actually use what they accepted in their statement of pervasion now as a reason. So what does that mean? Let's go back to the first one. So it follows that if something is reasonably described, something that is reasonably described as a hue, it's necessarily the definition of color. This means that if Tejal accepts any subject, say the color red, to be the first item, then you can use that first item, something reasonably described as a hue, as a reason to prove that the subject is the second item, the definition of color. So that's kind of a big chunk of words, but just to break it down. So let's pretend, Tejal, that you still believe that the pervasion was true, even though you kind of figured out by now it's not. But just go back to your initial accepting the pervasion. So take follows that if something is reasonably described as a hue, it's necessarily the definition of color. Oh, you got muted somehow there, I think. Is that on my end or your end?
No, it's on my end. Okay, I accept that statement.
You'll accept it just for the sake of demonstration. So now what I can do is say, right? So you accepted it, and now I'll do both one by one, but I'll use a reason this time. I'll add in a reason. So take the subject, the color red. It follows that it is something reasonably described as a hue.
I accept.
Yay, now I'll get her. Take the subject, the color red. It follows that it's the definition of color.
I accept.
You accept that one too. The color red is the
Oh, I
definition
don't.
of color.
No, no, I don't accept. No, why? Why?
Okay,
Sorry.
I mean we could go on to debate that, but I think before you
No,
didn't
no, no.
you never
Yes,
accepted that one before. So okay, so you say the definition of color. No, the color red is not the definition of color. It's just an
that's
instance
fine.
of color. It's a type of color. It's not the definition of
Mhm,
color, right?
mhm.
Now what would happen? Now we'll ask that second, but just so now take the subject, the color red. So she denied that it's the definition of color. So I'll prove to her that it is. Take the subject, the color red. It follows that it is the definition of color because it is something reasonably described as a hue. That's the
Oh,
pervasion that you just accepted.
so now I'm trapped, Venerable Donyo.
So now you're trapped. So this is where you have no choice but to somehow contradict the previous assertion you made. So either you
You
say,
cornered.
what?
I said you have cornered me.
Yes, this is being cornered. In Tibetan, we say korsum. This means yeah, basically you've cornered. You're cornered. Okay, checkmate kind of thing. So then what would you say, right? So there's a reason provided. So you either
Hmm.
say, if you say no pervasion, that means you reverse the previous pervasion you accepted when she accepted
That's right.
that if something is something reasonably described
Previous.
as a hue, it's necessarily the definition of color. And if she says the reason's not true, then she's, going back on her initial acceptance that the red color is something reasonably described as a hue. And so if she just accepts it, then that means she's going back on again, she's going back on the pervasion, I guess, right? She accepts that
So
now. Well, no, she wouldn't
in this,
accept it. Yeah, she wouldn't
in
accept
this
it. If she
case,
accepts it, then she goes back on her denial that the red color is the definition of color. So either way, she's going back on a previous assertion because we had her agree to all the assertions that are involved with this
mhm,
reason here.
mhm. Well, I would basically say no pervasion because you helped
Right,
me to
right,
understand by giving the illustration of red
right.
that this statement does not hold pervasion, which I thought it did.
So since there's no pervasion, then I'll double check. Okay, so you're saying no pervasion. So now
Mhm.
I'm going to restate the pervasion for clarity. So it follows that if something is reasonably described as a hue, then it's not, now adding in a negation here. She denied the pervasion, so now we have to negate the pervasion. So it follows that if something is something reasonably described as a hue, then it's not necessarily the definition of color.
I accept this statement.
And then we got a tsa. It's not a real tsa because you didn't. I made you accept it for the purpose of demonstration. But okay, so that's right. So now we have her. When someone says no pervasion, it's very very helpful to have them restate the pervasion. And tomorrow there'll be some templates in the worksheets that will have this written out as part of it. It's also in the language of Nalanda debate sheet, which is just 2 pages with all the different phrases that pretty much you ever say, all the stock phrases that we use in debate, which was posted yesterday in the WhatsApp group. So please do find that if you didn't already. And so let's see. It seems like do we have some outstanding questions? It might be a good time. Well, Teja, did you want to say something?
Just yeah, we have some hands raised, and I'm
Okay,
wondering if people have some burning questions. We could address
sure.
them now before we do our drill.
Yes. Okay, let's just close with the final kind of point about this topic of pervasions, which, to be quite frank, is in some sense, now you may have seen the subtitle for these lecture notes was the heart of logic. And in some sense, that's what it is. Why? Because when we're talking about a relationship of pervasion, well, we're talking about a relationship between two phenomena. It's a logical relation, which is the very basis for how the human mind is able to use logic to understand things. We generate some kind of understanding of a relation between things, a relation of necessity or entailment. Those are other, kind of technical logic terms that come up. But here in the Nalanda tradition, we use this word pervasion. Um, Essentially the meaning is the same, but it's got a slightly different feel, a slightly different flavor to it. Anyway, so it's just really important. So this is like if you really go into further logic studies, especially in the Nalanda tradition, like maybe also in Western logic, it would become, um, depending on what stream, it might become important. But certainly with Nalanda logic, when you really go into the detailed analysis of logic, it's an extremely important topic, is how are these relations both, how do they exist both sort of ontologically or empirically, but also, how do we come to understand them? How do you generate these, valid knowledge or pramana that understands a logical relation between two things? Okay. So, and in this case, what were the two things? Color and the definition of color, right? I mean, it was um, not something reasonably described as a hue in the definition of color, there actually isn't that kind of logical relation there, right? But what about if we take something like color and something which is reasonably described as a hue? So those do have a logical relation where if something is color, it's necessarily reasonably described as a hue. If something is reasonably described as a hue, it's necessarily color. So why is there that difference? That's just kind of an outstanding question to keep in your mind, and it's not the focus of this course, right? The focus of this course is to learn the actual, you know, the nitty gritty of the how to actually form a statement, not to like think about like deep questions of the nature of logic itself. But just wanted to put that out there. Okay, now let's see. Yeah, please, if you have a question, if you are, yeah, just come on up. Right, whoever comes on up first, if you have a question. Okay, we have Andrew. Thank you. Please unmute.
Uh, am I audible?
You are.
Okay, good. I definitely agree with your the Western system is concerned. On the side of the defender, what kind of commitments does the defender have to have in relation to this reasonably described as phrase? Because that's a very broad phrase. I mean, the defender can accept some premises to be reasonably described as, and when the offender tries to corner them in a particular semantic commitment, they can say, no, that's just not reasonably described as, right? And then you can, in the same way that the defender seems to have some sort of analytic right to split atomically a particular kind of sentence and dissect it that way, doesn't the defender basically have the same kind of intellectual rights to say, yeah, well, in such and such case, I accept based on this reasonable semantic criteria that it satisfies the definition. But on the other hand, you see, uh, it's an asymmetrical relationship, for example, right? I mean, redness is a color, but redness is not a representation of all possible definitions of color or what have you. So I'm just wondering, how much wiggle room does the defender actually have, similarly to how the attacker does?
So the defender has the wiggle room to be able to say that they deny something, that that the reason is not true, or that they don't accept a thesis, and then that just puts the onus back on the challenger to either prove to them that they're wrong or give them a chance to say something. So that's the thing. The challenger does have quite a bit more control over the course of the discussion in this style of debate. Although you saw in the example that Joe and Geshe Topke just did in the last session, Geshe Topke kind of just interjected with, well, this is a difficult question because XYZ. So it's like formal, but also we're all friends, and we're, again, the motivation that we start with when we go D is we're here to help each other gain knowledge and wisdom and insight. So it's not like you have to sit there like a rock and never say anything else ever. If you're really like burning to say, wait a minute, this, I have to clarify something. Of course, you can't, right? But the question about, just in this particular example you gave, So you're saying, well, something reasonably described as a hue, well, some colors are reasonably described as a hue, and maybe other ones aren't. So you would just, you know, if someone posits a subject that you don't believe is reasonably described as a hue, you would just say why to that as a thesis, and then, you would hope for the challenger to give you the chance to explain yourself by saying, what's the magic word? They would say, take the subject, the color, whatever, the color of a rainbow. It's not reasonably described as a hue because, and they would give you the chance to say something. That's when you have that open-ended question that we talked about yesterday. There's these open-ended or information-seeking questions that the challenger can pose to a defender. And again, when you're really trying to learn something, you'll ask those a lot, right? You're not just trying to trap, your defender by using some kind of tricky wording, and that's a kind of debate, and it has its place. We call it, we literally call it word debate in the monasteries in the traditional way. We do talk about a difference between word debate and meaning debate. We're actually like debating about the meaning of things and not just playing kind of word trickery or semantic trickery or something. Okay, I hope that answered the question. And please, Tejal, please, yeah,
I would
chime
just
in.
like to add or chime in. Andrew, thank you for your very excellent question. So it does seem like at first that the challenger is playing a very active role and the defender has very limited options. But I think when you have, defenders can have very extensive knowledge and they can pull from many different scriptural sources, which is like basically, it's like your bibliography. You're like a walking library, and you're able to quote from various different places to also defend your position. And actually, they say that, to become a good defender, it's a real art to learn to defend. And I just want to say that on the precise question of the semantics and the wordplay, in my understanding, that when you have this collected topic, when you are using a common basis or a common understanding of definitions and divisions, then in a way, both the challenger and the defender are constrained, or rather than constrain, or have the freedom to work within those parameters kind of equally almost. And of course, there's always, we might have doubt and we may investigate, as Doniola said, that we can have word debates. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
And then just, Tejal makes an extremely good point. The more you kind of know in the ordinary sense of just book knowledge, right? Just sort of like broad knowledge about the topic you're debating, then you'll have kind of, that much more behind your answers as a defender and behind your questioning as a challenger. So you may have noticed with the the exercises that we were going through in the last lecture, the last session when we did our breakout, we had questions about explosions and the Big Bang. And, well, probably you'd have a lot more to say about those questions if you, had studied chemistry or physics or astrophysics in the case of the Big Bang, and really kind of knew the, subtleties of those theories, the subtleties of what happens in an explosion, right? And you could be able to tease apart better. Well, is it really a sound? Is it something visual? Is it just some kind of energetic movement of something? I don't even know what it would be posited as. Then we also though have the interesting thing of coming to see quickly, a lot of these questions that we can apply this debate into the scientific arena. We see that there actually aren't clear and definitive answers to, and the moment you start to bring it up with an actual practicing scientist or a professor or a researcher, they oftentimes are a little bit stumped themselves. So that's kind of fun, fun slash an interesting. It just shows how much a new question can really, there can really be new questions even in a field that's very well established. There's still always questions remaining. Okay, let's see if there's any other further question for right now. Please come straight up to the stage if you have a question.
I see that Neuron and Svetlana have their hands raised. So if you still have a question, please come to the stage.
Maybe that was accidental hand raising. Okay. Okay, so if there's no further questions, then we'll begin to do, again, demonstration of the drills that we're going to have you practicing. So, Tejal, let's just go up to our drill. So we have 3. I'll again do a quick screen share, make sure we're all on the right sheet. Day 2.2, drill 1, thesis versus pervasion. So here we have, I'm not going to read through the instructions as written, that's too boring. So, but please do read them yourself. But just explaining it is easier. So we have a thesis statement followed by a pervasion statement. And each time it's the exact same 2 items. It's just that one is a thesis statement and the next one is a statement of pervasion. And so one person becomes the challenger, the other becomes the defender, and we simply state state each one turn by turn, and the defender responds with either I accept or Y. But the trick here is to pay attention. Are there particular questions where you're really like clear that you accept both of them, that there isn't really much difference, but some of them where you're really like, wait a minute, no, that really is a difference there. The thesis statement is true, the pervasion statement is not. So just pay attention to that if you notice that some have more, there's a reason for some of them to be more obviously different than others. So Tejal, let's see, who wants to be defender and who wants to be challenger? You want to rock, paper, scissors for it? The winner gets challenger. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. I can't see you. You have scissors?
Yeah, both of us do.
We're both scissors. All right, well, why don't you just go ahead and be the challenger, because I challenged you during the actual talk, so. Okay.
Okay, good. So now on the day 2.2 drill 1, okay, so take the subject, the color red. It follows it as primary color.
I accept.
Okay, it follows that if something is the color red, then it's necessarily primary color.
I accept.
Take the subject, the color of a cloud. It follows it as secondary color.
I accept.
It follows that if something is the color of a cloud, then it is necessarily secondary color.
Maybe Y for that. Y.
Take the subject, the taste of chocolate. It follows it as sweet taste.
I accept.
It follows that if something is the taste of chocolate, then it's necessarily sweet taste.
I don't know. I had chili chocolate once, so why?
Okay, so I do one more.
One more is good. Sure.
Okay, so take the subject, the shape of an oak tree. It follows it as high shape.
I accept.
It follows that if something is the shape of an oak tree, then it's necessarily high shape.
That's probably why, because you have like baby sapling oak trees, right?
That's right.
So then that's the thing, we're not actually going through the whole process in this drill of, asking the defender to posit an example, but I just kind of, you can still think of them, right? You can be thinking, well, what would be the shape of an oak tree that is not a high shape? Because obviously oak trees start off very, very low. Okay, so let's move on and we'll just do the exemplify. Okay, we're actually not tons and tons of time left, so let's go quickly and just do a couple. We'll just do a couple exercises for a couple of the next drills. So day 2.2, drill 2. Let's switch it up. I'll be the challenger this time.
Okay.
So this one, actually, the challenger has quite a bit more role. So we'll switch. I'll do 2 as a challenger, then you do 2 as the challenger. And here the defender is, we're asking the defenders, this is drill 2 here, just to accept. So just accept every time. Don't really think about whether it's true or not. As the defender, just accept the challenge here, or the drill here is really for the challenger to learn how to come up with a subject that they can make 2 thesis statements out of their pervasion statement. Okay, so let's just go through, I guess, the example on top together, and then I'll do the next one, and we'll switch, and you do too. So it follows that if something is matter, it's necessarily impermanent.
I accept.
Now take the subject, the sound of thunder. It follows that it's matter.
I accept.
Take the subject, the sound of thunder. It follows that it's impermanent.
I accept.
Good. One more. I'll do one more, then you do a couple. It follows that if something is exterior matter, then it's necessarily matter.
I accept.
Okay, so now I have to think of something which is exterior matter. So take the subject, the smell of a fir tree. Take the subject, the smell of a fir tree. It follows that it is exterior matter.
I accept.
Take the subject, the smell of a fir tree. It follows that it's matter. There we go.
I accept.
Good. Now you do a couple.
Okay, so it follows that if something is form, then it's necessarily exterior matter.
I accept.
Okay, so take the subject, a stone. It follows that it is form.
A stone? Okay, I accept.
Okay, take the subject, a stone. It follows it is exterior matter.
I accept that, yes.
Okay. So it follows that if something is shaped, then it's necessarily exterior matter.
I accept.
Okay, so take the subject, the shape of the eye modality. It follows it as shape.
You're giving me a stumper here. Oh, come on. The exercise is just to say you accept, so I don't know what to say. The shape of the eye modality. It is a shape. I'm gonna have to say why, I think. I mean, I honestly don't know. I'm gonna say why.
Okay, so
No,
anyway,
I accept. It's a shape. I don't know what it is. No, I have to say why. It's the eye modality. No. 1 second. The shape of the eye modality doesn't have to be the eye modality, so I'll say accept. I accept. Okay, why not?
Okay, so take the shape of an eye modality. It follows its necessarily exterior matter.
It follows its exterior matter. You gave me you had to give me a real stumper, so I'll say I accept, and then I'm glad that you're not going on to debate me about it.
Okay, good.
Okay, let's try the next drill.
You're just having some fun.
We'll sweep
So
that
it
one away.
follows that if
Okay, one more. Sorry,
it follows that if something is round shape, then it's necessarily a shape.
I accept.
Okay, so take the subject, the earth. It follows it as a round shape.
The earth, I accept.
Take the subject, the earth. It follows it's necessarily a shape.
Follows it is a shape. Why not? I accept.
Okay,
nice.
Great.
Okay, thank you. And there's only one more drill, and again, we'll just do quickly. Oh yeah. Okay, we'll just do like 2 examples just so everyone gets it. This one's really simple. It's not really easy, but it's simple. It's actually going to take a little bit of thinking, because what's the difference here is that we introduce negating, negative. What happens when, so here, we'll just go straight to the example. So now here we're asking all the defenders to always say no pervasion when the challenger states the reason that's, the 3-part syllogism with the reason that's written. Every time, just say no pervasion. Then the challenger is going to say restate the pervasion, and the defender has to say it, but inserting the word not, inserting a negation in there. So it gets a little trickier. So it's simple, but you have to kind of take a moment to think about it. Okay, so you want to do defending, or we'll switch it? We'll do two of each again. We'll do two of each. I'll
Yeah,
start as challenger. Take the subject, the sky. It follows that it's permanent because it's matter.
no pervasion.
Restate the pervasion.
If something is matter, it's not necessarily permanent.
Okay, if something is matter, it's not necessarily permanent. And now you'll
And
notice here,
sorry, go ahead, Tonyola.
so just pay attention here that in this phrasing, you don't need to say it follows anymore because now you're the defender. You're just stating, that, you're just restating what you denied. So if something is matter, it's not necessarily permanent. You only use the phrasing it follows as the challenger. Okay. So,
And Tonyola,
okay.
I also want to highlight for our participants that when the defender is restating the pervasion, what we are basically saying is if something is quote unquote the reason, it's not necessarily the predicate. And that's
Okay.
why in this statement, the reason is the matter, permanent is the predicate. And hence the restating of the pervasion is if something is matter, it's not necessarily permanent. If something is the reason, it's not necessarily the predicate.
That's
Thank you.
exactly right. And so, really, yeah, perfect way of phrasing it. So let's do a couple. Take the subject of flower. It follows it is not interior matter because it is matter.
No pervasion.
Restate the pervasion.
If something is matter, it's not necessarily interior matter.
Is that what the pervasion is though? So what's the predicate here? So this gets even trickier because there's two negations happening.
Oh,
But it's
sorry.
not a double negative. Because what's
Sorry.
happening is one negation goes in front of the word necessarily, and one negation goes after the word necessarily. So it's just listen. So I think we'll do it again, okay? And then just pay attention. So take the subject of flower. It follows it is not interior matter because it is not matter.
No pervasion.
Restate the pervasion.
If something is matter, it's not necessarily not interior matter.
It's not necessarily not interior matter, which means there are things which are matter and interior matter. Okay, so this gets tricky. Take the subject of flower. It follows it is exterior matter because it is not an elephant.
No pervasion.
Restate the pervasion.
If something is not an elephant, it's not necessarily exterior matter.
Right, so this time we have a negation in the reason. If something is not an elephant, it's not necessarily exterior matter. And again, just to clarify why, because there are many things that are not elephants, which are also not exterior matter, like interior matter, the eye sense modality, the air sense modality, or consciousness, things that are not matter at all, right? Or things that don't exist. We could say a pink elephant, right? Dumbo the elephant. They're not elephants, they're imaginary, but they're also not exterior matter, right? So there's no pervasion. Okay, Tejal. Actually, that's quite a lot of time already. I think that's enough. So let's break out and start practicing these drills. And, if you feel like you want to pursue one of these questions and go and start debating further since you got, the whole explanation just in the last lecture of how to do it, then I'd say now is the time you can start experimenting, kind of breaking out of the bounds a little bit. And I'm still sharing the screen, sorry. So you could do that, but also you can just stay right with the drills exactly as written if that's more comfortable. It depends on where you are in your debate education. And also, it's always handy to keep that document around, the debate outline, right? Just a reminder. Okay, so please go break out into your pairs or slightly larger groups. Remember, if you're in any of the circles that are towards the front of the temple here, then I might pop in so that I can stream your debate. So just be aware, if you don't want your debate streamed, please go to the back of the screen here, behind the temple, or to the back of the temple. Okay, thank you.
Have fun, everybody. This is going to be exciting in day 2. Now we're getting to the reasons and pervasions. And of course, Joe and Venerable Namjong, Stefan, myself, Doniola will be there to help you. Thank you, Doniola. I'm going outside.
Yes, dear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello.
Hi, just a quick question. How does, I'm not sure if these are a thing in the Tibetan language, but how do you deal with a word that has multiple denotations, like orange, for example, right? In English, orange is the form, but it's also the color. So can there be any pervasive nuances with this? Or does it affect thing?
Yeah, generally what we kind of do is, of course, there are homonyms and homophones in Tibetan.
Okay.
So we generally will do one of two things, either just go with the kind of most common meaning, or if it's a context where something's already been previously defined, and go just how it's defined in that context. Often it's just like the most common meaning gets, that gets the, what do you call it? That's what you go with. And then if you want to distinguish, so this comes up when you're talking about grounds and paths, because a path or a road is obviously more commonly referring to the thing you walk on outside the street, right? But then we also talk about it in terms of kind of spiritual realizations, right? These kind of conscious, mental experiences of spiritual truths. And so those kinds of paths, then we say, the path which is within the context of talking about spiritual grounds and paths, the path. We literally will like phrase it like that, salam nisu chepe lam, salam nisu chepe sa. So that's how you can specify if you're talking about a really like a word that's generally used in a different way, but in a certain context you're using it. You say the word within this context, and then just say it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
So you could say the fruit, you could say the fruit orange. You could just say, take the subject, the fruit orange, to specify that you're not talking about the color orange, right?
That's helpful.
Okay.
Is necessarily primary color.
Except.
The subject, the color of a cloud, it follows it is secondary color.
Sumani, you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I accept.
It follows that if something is the color of a cloud, then it's necessary secondary color.
I accept.
The subject, the taste of chocolate, it follows it is sweet taste.
I'm going to say why.
It follows if something is the taste of chocolate, then it is necessarily sweet taste.
Why?
The subject, the shape of an oak tree, it follows it is high shape.
I accept.
It follows if something is the shape of an oak tree, then it's necessarily high shape.
Why?
It follows the subject color. The subject color, it follows it is form.
Except.
It follows if something is color, it is necessarily form.
I accept.
Okay, someone
Shanti,
else
if I can
can
just
be.
interject.
Okay.
One second.
Sure.
So the format, just one small thing. It says take the subject, not just the subject.
Okay, Venerable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, the rest is quite good. Sorry.
So tell us,
Okay.
Shanti, when you want to switch. We'll take
Yeah,
turns.
you can switch.
Okay, so we'll start then with. I'll start with Levin. Then I'll be the challenger here then.
Okay.
And then we'll alternate between you and Sumani, and then Sumani, you can be the challenger. Okay.
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 So take the subject color. It follows it is a category under which red falls. Sumani?
I accept.
It follows that if something is a color, then it's necessarily a category under which red falls.
Why?
Take the subject something reasonably described as hue. It follows it is the definition of color. Shanti?
I accept.
It follows that if something is something reasonably described as hue, then it's necessarily the definition of color.
Why?
Take the subject color. It follows it is a singular object.
I accept.
It follows that if something is color, then it's necessarily a singular object.
Why?
Why?
Okay, Sumani, your turn to be the.
I'll be the challenger now. Take the subject, the referent of the word white. It follows it is the color white.
I accept.
It follows that if something is referent of the word white, then it's necessarily the color white.
I accept.
Okay. Take the subject I. It follows it is interior matter.
I accept.
It follows that if something is I, then it's necessarily an interior matter.
I accept. Why?
Okay. I guess the numbering is done in a way that the 19 and 20 are actually like it's the numbering went wrong here, I guess.
Yeah, it's part of the same thing, you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess okay. I'll start with the 21. So basically, it's the 20th question. Um, take the subject, the color of the light. It follows it is the secondary color.
I accept.
Okay. It follows that if something is the color of light, then it's necessarily the secondary color.
I accept.
Okay. Take the subject, a ball. It follows it is round shape.
I accept.
It follows that if something is a ball, then it's necessarily a round shape.
Why?
Okay. Take the subject, a baby's cry. It follows.
So when I look at the understanding matter and physical universe at that sheet that we were given, then under colors, there comes the secondary colors. And under the secondary colors, number one is the color of clouds. So I would naturally kind of like think it follows that if something is the color of a cloud, then it is necessary secondary color. I would probably say I accept. But it's interesting what you say.
Me too, me too, me too. I will say I accept.
Okay.
Okay, I accept.
No, it wasn't meant to change your mind. It was only meant to find out why it is that you said no. Why?
Well,
Okay.
I accept. Let me share something. I'm an advocate, and I get paid, or I'm a lawyer. I get paid for an argument.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the best way to stop someone from arguing is I say I accept,
Okay.
and then the
Yeah.
person goes haywire.
Ah,
That's
Okay.
how I like this is what I have invented with my lawyer friends. Like they argue a lot. Like within the chambers, we argue a lot. And the best argument, if I don't want to argue, is like I accept, and the person goes blank because he was expecting an argument.
Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Interesting.
So yeah, so you can go ahead with fifth.
Yes, so then it is the third one, right? Take the subject of a cloud. It follows it is secondary color.
No.
Is that what we did, or?
Oh, we did that.
We
We
did
are on
that.
fifth.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, take the
Taste of
subject
chocolate.
of the taste of chocolate. It follows it is a sweet taste.
Why?
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, why? What am I supposed to say after you say why? Why? Because then read the statement. Okay, so it follows that if something is the taste of chocolate, then it is necessarily sweet taste.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Mm.
Okay. Yeah, I would say why too. Okay. So then, if the subject is the shape of an oak tree, but this is interesting actually, when you say why, and then that's where the debate stops, really. In this case, that's where the debate stops. Isn't it? Or it's just this exercise?
This is the exercise. Like this
okay,
is
okay.
we are learning the small
Okay, the
sentences,
different
and
steps, yes.
the next is something that we'll go ahead and maybe then when I ask you why, you need to actually answer.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
So it's
Because
just the practice part.
naturally, the way I'm wired, I'd like to come to a conclusion.
Yes,
But
you
it's
even
good. I understand it is a course, so there's more things to come.
it's I'm exactly feeling what you are feeling. This like I have to deliberately stop myself and not argue.
Okay. Well,
Or
you being a lawyer,
debate.
yes, of course. You'd have to deliberately stop yourself. Yes, I can understand that. I can see that. Okay, so where were we?
Seventh.
7. So if the subject is, if the subject is the shape of an oak tree, it follows it is high shape.
Why?
Okay. It follows that if something is the shape of an oak tree, then it is necessarily high shape.
Why?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So maybe we can change.
We are supposed to change at 15.
Oh! I'm lazy. Then we are at 9.
We are at 9.
Right, 9. So if the subject is color, it follows. If the subject is color, it follows it is form.
Why?
Yeah. Interesting. It follows that if something is color, then it is necessarily a category under which red falls. Is that what I'm?
No. 10th.
No.
10th.
No.
It follows the.
It follows it follows that if something is colored, then it's necessarily formed. Sorry.
Why?
I got mixed up here.
Why?
Interesting. Okay. So if the subject is color, it follows it is a category under which red falls.
I accept.
Okay. it follows that if something is color, then it's necessarily a category under which red falls.
Then it's a category which red falls.
Necessarily a category.
I accept.
Okay. If the subject is something reasonably described as a hue, it follows it is the definition of color.
I accept.
Okay. It follows that if something is something reasonably described as hue, then it is necessarily the definition of color.
I accept.
Okay, so
so this is the last one you read, like
that's
the
it, yes.
15th one.
Roles. Yes. Okay, thank you. Very interesting.
Each, right? Okay, the first is example, right? It follows that if something is matter, it is necessarily impermanent. And then someone says, I accept.
Okay.
Right? And then take the subject, the sound of thunder, it follows it is matter. I accept. Take the subject, the sound of thunder, for it is impermanent. I accept. Okay. So it follows if something is exterior matter, it's necessarily matter.
I accept.
So take the subject, exterior matter, it follows that it is matter.
I accept.
Take the subject, take the subject exterior matter, no, I think I made mistake. I should have said the first question was, it follows that if something is oh dear, is what? I should.
Mariella,
Yeah.
I think you don't have to say it follows anymore. You can think of an example that is both exterior matter and matter. So that's kind of the job I think you have to do. So you search for something.
Okay, so we have two questions to give, right?
Exactly. Wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if hand is exterior matter, then it is necessarily matter.
I didn't hear the first question. Did you say if hand?
A hand.
Oh, a hand. I accept.
So take the subject. I don't know. Why is it? No.
Shall we give you another example?
Take the subject a hand. It follows it is. Now we need to okay. So if a hand is exterior matter, then it's necessarily matter. If it take hand,
Yes,
it follows that it is exterior matter. Take hand, it follows that is necessarily that it is matter.
I accept.
Yeah, there you go. That's you just kind of follow the same format of the example up there, and you pick a different subject. So you could say hand, right? Anything you like. But yeah, that was the correct format. So you just try and keep that keep going on that method.
Okay. So if follow that if a computer is formed, then it's necessarily exterior matter.
I accept.
No. If a computer is
So
take a
here you
computer
start, yeah, you
take a
start
computer.
just with if something, and then the something gets you, that can cover everything that exists in the universe. And so you just say something is formed, then it's necessarily exterior matter. Then you change it to put your own subject in, like a computer. So then you say, take the subject, a computer. It follows that it is form. And you make another statement. Take the subject, a computer. It follows that it is exterior matter. So in the first statement, when you have the pervasion, all you say is, it follows that if something is. So you don't say a specific subject yet.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's just as it's written in the drill is how you would say it.
Okay. So it follows that if something is shape, then it's necessarily exterior matter. Then take the subject cube, then it follows it is exterior matter. It is shape. Take the subject cube, then it's necessarily exterior matter. No.
I accept.
Sorry, I went too fast. I didn't let Adam answer. I'm sorry. Okay, so I have another two. It follows that if something is a round shape, then it's necessarily a shape.
I
It
accept.
follows. Take the subject circle. It follows it is a round shape.
I accept.
Take the subject circle. If it follows it's a shape.
I accept.
Okay. So it follows that if something is a shape of orb-like quality, what is that? Then it's necessarily a round shape. Take the subject ball.
Sorry, a ball. Okay.
Yeah, it follows, then it's necessarily, then it is necessarily a shape of orb-like quality.
I accept.
Take the subject ball, then it is necessarily a round shape.
I accept.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Daniel, is it okay if I ask you one to see if I'm asking it correctly, like if I'm getting how this drill works?
I have
Okay.
a difficulty hearing exactly what you're saying. I don't know. There is a reverberation, like the sound is not that clear when you speak.
Okay. Wait. Let me change my.
Yeah, now we don't hear anything. Yeah, now you're silent. We don't hear a word. Oh no.
You might have, Adam, you might have to change the mic kind of setting on your computer if you switch the mic you're using. Like in the speaker, you can usually adjust. Or I know when you actually first log into Gather Town, it asks you which mic you want to use. So maybe there's a way to go and change it now that you're already in. Yeah, if you go to the settings, I can screen share for you. If you go to the settings here, you see the user and then audio and video. And now you can change which mic you're using. And you see how I have a few myself. So you might have a few like that you can choose from. Mm.
This
Yeah.
is better.
Much better.
Okay, sure. Thanks, guys, for helping me. Doniola, is it okay if I ask you a question to see if I get how this drill works?
Go for it. Sure.
So I'm gonna try layer see if I get this. So take the subject, the color of shadows. It follows it is a secondary color, and then you say it follows from there that it's exterior matter.
Which one are we on?
Oh no, sorry, I kind of made one up there.
Yeah. You would just state the statement of pervasion as written, just again to practice using the language, and then you would take a subject like you did, yeah. So and then make two thesis statements with it. So yeah, if you used, what about number 6 there? How would you do that one?
Number 6. So it follows that if something is a color of darkness, then it's necessarily a color. And now I have to make a new thesis statement. Am I correct? Which is a pervasion.
The new thesis statement, you create or you think of a subject that would fit both of those different items. So that would be both the color of darkness and would be a color. So you think of a subject. You say take the subject.
Could you maybe give me an example of how you do?
Yeah, I mean, so take the subject, the color of the darkness that is inside of a box. Color of darkness inside of a box. It follows that it is the color of darkness. That's one thesis statement. Take the subject, the color of darkness inside of a box. It follows that it is a color. Second thesis statement.
Oh, I see. And then you could say take the color of darkness inside of the box. It follows that it is form or exterior matter or matter, and you just kind of keep layering it back like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, you go through each of the pervasion statements here, and then you could pick a different subject, or you could use the same subject.
Okay.
To you. But you're just making two thesis statements, and you're putting these two items that are in the pervasion statement, so the color of darkness and then color here, you're putting those as the predicate of each of the two new thesis statements. The subject.
Are you saying the original subject and make it the thesis statements predicate?
The subject is coming from your mind. The subject is not on the paper. So you think of this. That's why I said take the subject, the color of darkness inside of a box. You have to think of some instance of a color of darkness. The color of darkness at midnight. The color of darkness on the far side of the moon. Something, right? Something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay.
So the only things written here, they become the predicates. The subject comes from you. That's the difference.
So the original subject becomes the new thesis statement's predicate, and then you have to make up a new subject for that second thesis statement.
You got it.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, I see. Okay. Well, would someone like to continue the drill with me, or?
Yeah, Farina, you want to go? And
Sure. I was wondering because Robin also joined maybe
Ladies and
because I
gentlemen,
had a
sorry to
bit of.
interrupt.
Oh,
Yes.
We are going to end the session soon, so if you would like to make your way slowly back into.
Well, thank you very much, all of you.
oh well, there's still a lot
And
left to do
see
in
you
the
in the
session.
Gompa, I would say, or in the hall.
Awesome.
What did he say?
You can call it the Gompa, sure. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. So no, I meant the hall. Yeah, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Donio.
Gompa.
Thank you, Maria and Adam.
So cheers, guys. Thank
Last year, we always let people have it open end.
All right, so people are coming back in, and we can take some questions with just the 5 minutes that are left, but maybe just one or two questions if there are any. It does seem like these exercises were a little bit more complex, or had, you know, a little bit more going on than yesterday, right? That's sort of the sense I got from listening in, which is good. That means that it's getting more challenging and that you're learning something new. And we just want to make sure that it's clear, though, what the purpose is and what the actual drills are supposed to be, you know, what's involved in them. So if there's any doubt about the actual instructions or what you were supposed to be doing, then that's also good to ask. Otherwise, if you just have any question that's come up so far, then feel free to raise your hand or come straight to the stage. So, see, yeah, so whoever has a question, you can come straight to the stage. Yes, is that Ida?
Welcome, Ida. Please unmute yourself.
Hello there. Hi there. Just a very simple question. We didn't get to drill 3 in our group. Is there any chance that we can do drill 3 tomorrow?
So we still have the hour-long debate session. Are you able to make that in any of the time zones?
Yes.
So that's a good time where you can do that drill. You can repeat all the drills that you've done or do any that you didn't get to yet. So that's why we have that whole extra hour. You know, but of course on following days, if you get with your partner and you go, hey, I really wanted to repeat something from yesterday, go for it. You know, it's like you're not, yeah, it's very up to what you guys need and want to work on, for sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Welcome, Hansla. So nice to see you here.
Hello, Tejala. How are you? Nice to see you too. Thank you. We were doing some discussions in this group, and it's a very nice discussions, very good. But we were taking it a little bit more easy because it's we're at least in my case, I'm a newcomer to debate style. Okay, so I was wondering about the day 2 to drill 2, and maybe the example, especially where in this, take the subject, the second subject, the sound of thunder. What is the background for that sound of thunder? Is it something? Do I see that right?
That's right. The sound of thunder replaces the something. That's exactly right.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I can see that now because I can see the color scheme. Okay, all right. Okay, so the same like what was just being said. We did not go through all the examples, so I'll see how we.
Okay, so that sounds like that's good. Then there'll be plenty to do during the practice session. So that's 1 p.m. for us in the U.S. Eastern and wherever else you are that you can make your debate session. And again, if you have questions about it, so this one was a little bit different because that's like the content we covered today. It's tricky. How do you get this thesis statement out of a pervasion statement? What does that really mean? So that's why we're practicing it. But the something, you have to put your own subject in. You have to think something. Well, what kind of something? If something is matter, so any kind of matter, a sound, a smell, a taste, a particle, a photon, what have you, that's something you provide when you make your thesis statement. Good.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're just about at time, and I don't see any more. I see one hand, but it looks like that might be up by mistake because that was up before as well. So I think with that, oh, someone just raised a hand. Okay, why don't we take one more question, and we'll
No.
keep the answer short. Sonam Rigzin, would you like to ask your question? You can come up. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Venerable? Okay. We were discussing the exercise drill number 2.1, drill number 3. It's a reason true and reason not true. So have we done this one earlier or not? Or are you just confusing there?
So that was from the previous lecture, and what's your question about it? Sure.
Okay, now question is that while we were doing that, is the taste of the chocolate a bitter taste? Take the subject. Okay, it follows it is a bitter taste, but because it is color. Sorry, not color. Maybe we have to see color. Yeah, it's an exterior matter. So in the definition, it says the tongue modality is also included in the interior matter. Then the exterior matter, it also includes the taste, which has a definition of interior matter, the tongue modality. So is it the true reason is true or not? Or it's just confusing. We have a
I see. The reason is true that the term, so this is about kind of the terms in that debate outline, and we'll just keep it brief because time is up. But and this is something we can discuss more about what these definitions really mean and what those terms mean. So the modality is just the Wangbo, right? I mean, I think probably know a little Tibetan, so the Wangbo is the modality. It's just another translation for it, like a sense power. And so it's given over to experience through the tongue modality. That doesn't mean it is the tongue modality, right? The tastes, they're able to become experienced or become an object of tongue of your taste consciousness because of the tongue's modality. So the tongue's modality is present, put the chocolate on the tongue, and it gives rise to a taste consciousness. So that's just that's what the meaning of the definition of taste there is, right? An object given over to experience through the tongue sensing modality and experienced in the domain of taste consciousness is just a process for how you come to experience tastes, right? So that's the Wangbo.
It is this exterior matter which also include the interior matter.
So exterior matter and interior matter are contradictory. There is nothing which is both of them. So the exterior matter is again, that's the the physical cause giving rise to sense impressions, which is not directly linked to the affective experience of conscious organisms. So that just means things that are not within your body's sensing modalities.
That means this reason is true.
The reason is true. That's the short of it. The reason is true.
Okay. Thank you.
Taste of chocolate is exterior matter. That's right. Good. Okay. Thank you for the question. And I think that I don't want to keep people long, so it doesn't look like there are many more questions. So I don't think there's a need to stay after even. But again, you're always welcome to post them into the chat group.
Just checking if Neuron, do you have a pressing question? It seems like maybe, or.
Oh, you do have a question? Good. Okay. Thank you for coming. Go ahead. Please unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hello.
It's not a very pressing question. Day two, drill 2, when a challenger has to make two thesis statements, does he have to take the same subject for two statements, or the subject can be different?
So the aim here is to see how you can take one subject and it has to be used in both thesis statements, and both of them have to be true if the original pervasion statement is true. So that's the point, is to use the same subject. Yeah. Because that means that's
Okay.
something.
Okay.
The something in the statement of pervasion, it follows that if something is XYZ, then it's necessarily ABC. The whole point of the something is that you can pick one subject, which is both of those things. One subject which is matter and impermanent, or whatever you have in your statement of pervasion. Yeah, so that would be the preference.
Okay.
That would be the ideal thing there. Great, good question. That's great. And so thank you
Thank
so
you.
much,
Thank
everybody, and we will see you at the debate
Thank you.
practice sessions. We will be happy to take more questions in WhatsApp or during the practice sessions. And of course, when you do go to debate practice, please go through the drills from